This is one of my favorite segments on the ET Money Show. It's a Travel Thursday, and this gives us an opportunity to see various parts of the world. We speak to intrepid travelers and we ask them for advice as to how we can have a great time when we go globe trotting. Joining me now to talk to you about Italy is Kritika Goel. Thank you so much, Kritika, for taking the time. Always a pleasure speaking with you. I asked you to suggest a few places, and Italy was the one that stood out to me the most. Would you say that Italy is one of the foremost places to visit in Europe? Why is it such a great place to go?
Hi, firstly, thank you so much for having me again on this show. So I just got back from a very long trip around the world, actually, a 5-month long trip. And Italy was a very short part of my trip, but it's something that really stood out to me because I think of just the diverse range of things that Italy has to offer. So I didn't get to travel too much within Italy, but today we're talking about, I think, Rome and Vatican City. And I feel like Rome is just literally the center of history. And as someone who loves history, I absolutely loved Rome. So I feel like Rome has something to offer for everyone, from like history, culture, museums, to some incredible architecture, and of course the best food and drinks. Italian food is like famous all over the world. So yeah, I think visiting Rome is sort of like the closest we can get to being in a time machine, because it's literally like you're walking around so much history. And I think because of that, it's just such an amazing place to visit.
Fabulous. So we are focusing indeed on Rome and the Vatican City. Of course, the architecture and the art and all of that is so beautiful. But before we get into that, tell us about getting there. Obviously, you need a Schengen visa, right? And how early should you plan to book your tickets? What's the best time to go there?
So my advice usually for anyone traveling is to book as in advance as possible. With the Schengen visa, you sort of have to apply to the country where you will be spending the most time. So typically when someone is planning a trip to Europe, it's not like you're only going to cover one country. It's very easy to go from one country to the other when you're in the Schengen region. So if you're spending, say, the maximum number of days in Italy, then you would ideally apply to the Italian embassy at VFS in India. So I would say as early as possible, although that's not what I followed. I literally decided to go and like a month before I kind of booked my tickets. But when you're applying for your visa, you do have to sort of have a proper itinerary in mind and show your bookings and stuff. So the earlier you plan, the better it is and the more cost effective it is as well.
Would you say that Rome and the Vatican City is something that you can spend a lot of time in, or do you think that you should club it with other things that you do in Italy since you're going that far?
I mean, I would definitely say if you're planning a trip to Europe, of course, it depends on how many days you can take off from work and stuff, but the longer the better because there's so much to see. Even within Italy, like I would love to go back because there's so much more to see. Rome, I think you can easily spend like 4 or 5 days at least, if not more. I only went there for a short trip. I was there for 3 nights. So technically like 4 days, I think. And I managed to see everything I wanted to see, but it was a bit rushed. So I would say definitely consider like a longer period and try to cover more places, whether it's within Italy or like a few other countries and cities around Europe.
Let's talk more about the culture and what you absolutely must see, Kritika, in Rome and in the
Okay.
Vatican City. What's on your list?
Okay, so the list is very, very long. So I'll quickly go through maybe my favorite places. Firstly, there's the Colosseum. It's the oldest, largest standing amphitheater in the world where the gladiator fights used to take place back in the times of Roman civilization. And it's one of the most iconic landmarks. It's also one of the seven wonders of the world. So I feel like a trip to Rome is incomplete without seeing the Colosseum. And right opposite the Colosseum is the Roman Forum, which personally for me, I prefer that to the Colosseum just because of how much there is to see there. So it sort of was the center of Roman civilization back in the day. And what you see there today are ruins of the Roman civilization. So I think, yeah, it just feels like you're taking a walk down like history, and it's just so iconic. Like you see places where Julius Caesar had his funeral and like stuff like that. So it's just amazing if you're a history buff. Then, of course, there's the Vatican City. So within Rome, if you're doing a trip there, there's a whole other country within Rome itself, the Vatican City, which you can sort of just walk up to. So it's kind of cool because you just cross borders. Technically, you're going into another country. It's the smallest country in the world, and it's also one of the most important religious sites in the world. And here you can easily spend an entire day exploring the Vatican. So there's the St. Peter's Square, which is a very iconic square. It's actually not a square, it's circular. Then there's St. Peter's Basilica, which is the largest church in the world. And of course, the Vatican museums, which I think were my personal favorite part of the Vatican. And within the Vatican Museum, there's the Sistine Chapel, which is very iconic. You're not really allowed to take photos and stuff in there, but it has some of like the most breathtaking artworks and Michelangelo's frescoes. So that's definitely worth visiting. And apart from that, I think in Rome, there's the Pantheon, which is one of like the best preserved buildings from the Roman civilization. So that's definitely worth visiting. There's the Trevi fountain, which I think is one of the most popular fountains in the world. Like everyone goes there to, I think that's probably the most photographed fountain or something in the world. And there's also the famous tradition of like facing your back against the fountain and throwing coins into the water over your shoulder for good luck. So I think that's kind of like a nice place. And of course, when in Italy and when in Rome, you have to eat Italian food, gelato, wine, Italian coffee, tiramisu. So I'm vegetarian, but even then, like I love Italian food. So there are fewer options as a vegetarian, but amazing, amazing food. Not surprisingly, I think the best Italian food I've had in life has been in Rome. So yeah, there's that and lots more to see, but I would say these like are my top recommendations.
We got to speak about money, and you mentioned Trevi Fountain. I know somebody who carried a 5 rupee coin to throw in there, but having said that, it's better than the euro, right? But having said that, let's talk about how much it would cost you when you go there, right? Can you go there on a budget, or do you have to shore up your finances when you plan to make a trip there?
Okay, so Europe in general, I feel is more expensive, but I was surprised with how affordable Rome was. So I wasn't aiming to do like a very budget trip. It was somewhere in the middle. It wasn't like a luxurious trip, but I think overall it was like quite on the budget side. So maybe I'll give you a breakdown of what I spent on. So like I said, I spent 3 nights in Rome. I stayed in like I wouldn't say a very fancy place, but it was quite a decent place. It was called A Piece of Rome. And for 3 nights, I also went there with a couple of my friends actually. So we sort of split costs. So I feel like when you're going solo, things do become more expensive. The rest of my trip in Europe was mostly solo, so it was more expensive. But typically, I feel like people go with someone, and hotel costs in general in Rome seemed a lot more affordable than elsewhere. So per person, it came up to around like 8,500 rupees for 3 nights. Then there are so many things to do. So you need like tickets for the Colosseum, the Roman Forum, the Vatican museums, and any other like sightseeing places you visit. So that for me came up to around 3,500 rupees. And then the commute, I feel like with Rome, one good thing is a lot of places are walkable. So like, for example, the Vatican Museum, the Vatican City, I kind of just walked from my hotel. It was like a 15-20 minute walk. But otherwise, there are airport shuttles, buses, metro. Buses, in my experience, weren't the most reliable in terms of timings, but of course convenient. I think metro is like the best way to go around. So that came up to around 2,000 rupees for me. And food is one place where we didn't really want to sort of compromise on, because we really wanted to try out like a lot of different Italian food. So that came up to rupees 8,500 per person. So overall, like I think for me, this trip to Rome and the Vatican was around like 22,500. It can obviously be like a bit more or a bit less depending on how much luxury and how many things you want to do. But I think fairly you can do like a budget trip to Rome.
Okay, I do also want to ask about how much you would normally spend on food. If you were to draw a comparison, and you have given me how much you spent, but for somebody perhaps who's spending a little bit longer in Italy, in Rome, would you say that it's 30, 35, 40% costlier than what you would find in India, say in Mumbai, or is it less than that?
I wouldn't say it's less, but I also felt like it wasn't that much more. Again, I had a mix of like street food, cheaper options. Some of the places, especially for dinners that I went to, were more expensive. So on average, I feel like per person was around 2,000, 3,000 rupees, which I feel in India, obviously, if you're going to the more expensive places in cities like Mumbai, that's kind of how much it comes up to, especially when you're having wine and stuff like that. So I feel like it was a bit on a similar level.
In terms of, and you mentioned the travel inside in Rome, but what other tips would you give? Like, for example, if you're talking about the UK, then or you're talking about London, then a lot of people talk about using the tube. You can use your tap-in cards and all of that. So, is there something that you need to bear in mind if you're talking about Rome?
So within Rome, in my experience, I feel like walking combined with metro was the best way to commute, the most reliable in terms of like timings and everything. So metro, you can sort of just like buy tickets over there. The thing with buses is that I found that a bit strange, but you can't buy tickets on the bus itself. So you kind of have to buy it. There are specific stores where you can buy bus tickets, or the metro station, you can buy tickets there. So there is a bit more like planning involved there, but metro is kind of convenient. So in terms of travel, but I feel like typically when people go to Rome, they're doing other places within Europe as well. And flights within Europe, in my experience, were very inexpensive. So I flew from the Netherlands to Rome and then back, and the round trip was 19 euros, like 19 euros. So that I think is like 1,500 rupees or 1,600 rupees, which I thought was very, very affordable. You don't always get such cheap flights, I think, but Europe does have a lot of budget airlines. So that's something to take advantage of. And I also feel like in Europe in general, having like a URail pass is very useful. So for my trip, I had a URail pass, especially if you're taking like a lot of train rides along your trip, especially like intercity trains or more expensive trains. So having like a URail pass definitely helps too.
Thank you so much for joining in, Kritika. Really helpful, and I love the pictures that you sent us. Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much.